This video is a brief history of U.S. public education. Come along with me for the ride. I noticed early on that I could not fit everything I wanted to on this board, and I realized early on that I do not like writing in chalk, and I also realized that I ain't got time to cover all the background that gets us to what we do have time for is to jump into the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So here's a nice detailed timeline for you. I did pull it straight from our text, and that citation is at the end. I want you to know, though, that education was important to the early British colonialists. It was only 6 years from the founding of the Massachusetts Bay Colony to the establishment of Harvard College, now university, in 1636. There were laws on the books mandating students be educated or children be educated, but there weren't laws mandating schooling necessarily, and those laws were largely unenforced. However, in 1647, you get the Massachusetts Bay Colony enacting the Old Deluder-Satan Act. So if you were a town of 50 families, you had to have a primary school. If you were a town of 100 families, you had to have a Latin school. And it's all because of that old deluder Satan. So we have to teach our kids how to read so that they can understand the Bible, so that they can not be led astray by Satan and instead can be good Christian Americans. Yay. Ooh, we got to make some progress in our timeline here. So notice there's this American Revolution that happens, and that's kind of a big deal. We've got Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and others arguing back and forth about what American education needs to look like. But we ain't got time to talk about all that. We got to jump to this guy called Horace Mann. In 1837, Horace Mann is appointed as the Secretary of the Massachusetts Board of Education, and in 1839, he's already got the first normal school opened in Lexington, Massachusetts. What's a normal school, you might ask? A normal school is a school, I guess, for teaching teachers how to educate students in the norms of society. See, because Horace Mann was heavily influenced by the Prussian school model. He even goes to Germany. In fact, if you were going to write a children's book, you might call it Horace Mann Goes to Germany in 1843. Horace Mann goes to Germany and he learns about the Prussian school model. And as he's learning about it, he brings so many of those ideas to the U.S. The Prussian school model includes all sorts of things, but what really affects the U.S. is the idea that schools should be organized by the state or even the national government. There's an emphasis in Prussian schools on creating good citizens, Americans, in the case of Horace Mann and his contemporaries. This also brings to the U.S. the idea of compulsory schooling. There's also the idea of the public education in a common language, which is kind of a thing that makes some sense if you realize that we've just come through some stuff as a nation, right? And then there's a civil war. So now we've got black folks who used to be slaves, and we got to educate them. Or do we? Yes, we do, which is where we're going to jump to next. So in 1896, there's the Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court decision that establishes separate but equal as the law of the land. That is to say, as long as public accommodations are equal, then segregation is fine. But of course, we know that didn't work out so well. Brown versus Board of Education comes back and overrules Plessy versus Ferguson, which is why it's fine that it fell off the board in 1954, saying that no, in fact, separate is not equal, which lays the groundwork for the passage of the Education for All Handicapped Children Act in 1975, which itself is the precursor to the current Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, aka IDEA, that holds sway these days. So there's you a set of educational reforms based in jurisprudence and the passage of law. And then in 1980, the Department of Education is elevated to a cabinet-level position within the federal government. The Secretary of Education becomes a member of the president's cabinet. And in 1983, there's the publication of this text, A Nation at Risk, which calls itself The Imperative for Educational Reform. And we needed that reform because, you know, the communists in Soviet Russia and the People's Republic of China were going to ruin democracy for the rest of the world, so we had to fix our education system. But even after the fall of the Soviet Union, the reforms didn't stop. But that, in short, is how we get from places that look like this all the way to classrooms that look a little bit more like this. This has been a brief history of U.S. public education. Thanks for watching. There's my bibliography.